Welcome to all of you who are joining us for the lecture this afternoon. This lecture is part of the program in our library fall lecture series highlighting the treasure of the HUC library collection, featuring leading scholars who will share their expertise with us. With over 1 million items, including books, manuscripts, microfilms, maps, broadsides, bookplates, music scores, stamps, and much more, the HUC libraries have the largest Judaica collection in the Western Hemisphere, in second in size, only to the Judaica collection at the National Library of Israel. Joining me today is our friend and colleague, Dr. Michael Marmur, Associate Professor of Jewish Theology at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion's Taub campus in Jerusalem. Until July 2018, he served as the provost at HUC-JIR, where he was my boss and a great mentor to me. Dr. Marmur has written extensively on Jewish philosophy and theology and has published 2 books. Today, Dr. Marmur will discuss Abraham Joshua Heschel, Debate and Action in Times of Crisis. Please welcome Dr. Marmur.
Thank you so much, Yoram, for the introduction. It's actually doubt rather than debate, although there'll be
doubt.
There will be some debate about doubt, without doubt. It is it's good to be together. Abigail said at the beginning that I had pivoted with the topic, which is true, but that I would somehow be providing you with an update on what's going on in Israel, which is ambitious, because that's not my primary aim. The reality is, the grim reality is, that I'm speaking to you as Israel is in the midst of a war, 1 month in. And the topic that I thought to highlight today, in view of that situation, the topic of doubt, is one that becomes particularly acute in such moments of upheaval, of uncertainty, of a kind of existential anguish and concern. On the one hand, one is plagued by doubts, and on the other, often what happens in times such as these is that one of the victims of war is doubt. Doubt is somehow considered to be a commodity that one needs to be frugal in deploying. We're meant to find truths to which we can adhere free of doubt. And what I want to try and do in the minutes that we have together is bring together a couple of different strands. Abraham Joshua Heschel, who originally, in the before times, before the war began, was going to be the topic of my Cloud Library lecture. And this topic of doubt, which is something I've been thinking about and writing a little about in the course of these last dramatic days. And what the structure of this is, I'm first of all going to say something general about this concept of doubt, to use the English word, and safek, to use the Hebrew term, a little bit about where that word comes from and what it denotes. And so we'll begin with a few general reflections on doubt, and then we'll say something more specifically about Abraham Joshua Heschel, who, parenthetically, lived between 1907 and 1972, and is generally, I think, acknowledged to be one of the most significant Jewish thinkers, activists, spiritual figures of his age, of the 20th century, whose impact, whose resonance continues decades after his death. In fact, I can tell you that I gave a paper at an academic conference some years ago in which I tried to survey the Heschel literature and then about 8 or 9 years later, went back and surveyed everything that had happened in the subsequent time. And the Heschel literature had more or less doubled in the course of less than a decade. That Heschel is in fact enjoying and continues to enjoy enormous interest in Jewish and well beyond Jewish circles, and interestingly, more and more in languages other than English in other countries. Heschel's role in Israel is a particularly fascinating topic all of its own. For all sorts of reasons, Heschel was largely unknown and unmentioned in Israel for decades. But due to the efforts, particularly of a man called Dror Bondi and a circle of Israeli Heschelists, you might call them, and also, I think, because of changes in Israeli society, what Heschel stands for and what he represents has become much more resonant in recent years. In Israel, there's been a large amount of translation activity. Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote in 4 languages. He wrote in Yiddish, in Hebrew, in German, and in English. And a lot of material now has been translated from English and indeed from Yiddish into the Hebrew language. There's a lot of Heschel being thought about and taught in all sorts of different circles here. But also, you'll find that there's a proliferation of literature in Portuguese, in Spanish, in French, all over the place. So the structure, to return, is I'm going to say something general about doubt, and then I'm going to talk about Heschel's take on doubt, things he had to say on aspects of doubt. And as the thing moves forward and moves to the end, I imagine that the relevance, that the connection between the Heschel material and our current dramatic situation will become clear. To reiterate, this is not intended to be a military update or a bulletin from Israel, but one cannot, certainly if you're going to do justice to the legacy of Abraham Joshua Heschel, you cannot talk about abstract concepts and remove them from their social reality, from their kind of all too actual context, which is playing out as we speak. As was mentioned, I will try and plan to organize my time in such a way that there will be time for questions and comments. At the end of this, I can already guarantee that it will be inadequate time, particularly if you ask me to solve all problems of the Middle East and clear up any other global. We can do global warming at the same time if you like. In other words, we won't be able to do too much of that. But if there are questions relating to the things I'm talking about that I'm in a position to provide some insight with and for, I'd be more than delighted to try and address those questions. So that's what we're going to do. There is inevitably a PowerPoint, which I will slip in and out of, and hopefully that will not be too kind of annoying as we go along. The title I gave for the talk originally was Doubt and Action in Times of Crisis, but I'm really going to home in on the doubt. We'll meet another time and talk about action, but there's enough doubt to fill this fill the time slot that we have, so that will certainly be the emphasis. Perhaps before jumping into the presentation, I should not assume that everybody in this call is acquainted with who it is we're talking about when we mention Abraham Joshua Heschel. I've given you his dates: 1907, born in Warsaw. As a young man, he moves out of his intense Hasidic background and finds his way to Vilna, to Vilnius, where he falls in with a circle of Yiddish poets and gets himself also a kind of general education to match his very, very profound and rich a Jewish education. He was an extremely learned Jew. From Vilna, he makes his way to Berlin in the late 20s, is in Berlin as the Nazis rise to power, and through the good offices of Julian Morgenstern, the president of Hebrew Union College, and the Refugee Scholars Project of our institution, he comes out just before he's deported or repatriated to Poland, which was the Nazi policy at the time. From Poland, he gets himself out initially to England. He's in England when the war breaks out. And from there, he comes to Cincinnati and spends the war years in Cincinnati, Ohio. Thereafter, making his way to New York City, where he's a member of the faculty of the Jewish Theological Seminary until his death in the early 70s. He is I would just say this about Heschel. Typically, when we're talking about North American Judaism, there are two agendas which are sort of jostling for primacy. One is what you might call a spirituality agenda, and the other is a social action, tikkun olam kind of agenda. One of the remarkable things about Abraham Joshua Heschel is that he is an iconic leading figure for both of these. So that whether or not your main interest is the inner life, prayer, spirituality, and so forth, or and for that matter, Torah study and all the rest of it, or whether your main passion is for rendering significant social change, in either case, you are likely to look to the model of Heschel in some kind of playing some kind of significant role. Okay, that's enough introductions that more than anyone should have to bear. So let's take a look at this, and we'll see how we go along. So I'm emphasizing doubt in times of crisis. And when we get to Heschel, I'll be looking particularly at his things he had to say during times of extreme crisis in Nazi Germany, the Second World War, and beyond. But let's first of all say something about doubt. In 1935, Porgy and Bess first appears, a great opera by the Gershwins, and musicologists have noted the fact, or at least posited the theory, that the tune for It Ain't Necessarily So, one of the great showstoppers of that musical, bears significant similarities and probably owes some of its some of the inspiration from the traditional Ashkenazi tune for the blessings over reading the Torah. So although you hadn't not expected me to sing, and believe me, it's not advised that I should sing too much, I'm suggesting to you that it ain't necessarily so, and Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach are in fact joined at the hip. And the reason I find this interesting, and that's why I want to start, is it's more than a nice irony that a song that gives a catalog of Bible stories and then tries to undermine them or express skepticism as to their historical veracity, etc., finds its inspiration from the blessing we would recite upon reading the Torah. Typically, we might imagine, right, that there is a dichotomy, a choice to be made. Either you're in the doubt camp or you're in the faith camp. But that, I want to suggest, is a dichotomy that speaks much more to a certain strand of Christian theology than it does. It doesn't accurately reflect the role that doubt plays within our system. Without our system, by which I mean different aspects and dimensions, expressions of Judaism, Jewish culture through the ages. Actually, it is possible to read the Torah and find a place for doubt within it. It is not the case, I want to suggest to you, that to be a faithful and diligent Jew is to do everything you can to banish doubt. All right, let's go back to the movie for a moment. Without over psychologizing this, it might be the case that, like other emotions, love, hatred, and all the rest of it, it is self-doubt that maybe is the most fundamental and most elemental expression of doubt. And Moses, if you like, our greatest hero, is himself a classic exemplar of self-doubt. Here you have from the 6th chapter of the book of Exodus, God spoke to Moses saying, "Come and speak to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, so that he might ascend the children of Israel, the Israelites, from his land." And Moses spoke before God saying, the Israelites wouldn't listen to me. I had an earlier experience in which I attempted to express some kind of leadership, and it was a terrible flop. If it didn't work with my own people, how should it be that Pharaoh would listen to me, since I am aral sfatayim, a man of impeded speech? The expression of doubt that we have in the example of Moses is a measurement of that which is being demanded or expected of me on the one hand, and that which I believe I am capable of on the other. The gulf between those two is the area in which doubt can flourish. But self-doubt, the nagging sense that any of us might have that we are not equal to the task, whatever the task might be, is certainly not the only kind of doubt we can find in our classic sources and beyond. A word about words before we carry on. You could make the case that there's no doubt in the Bible, by which I mean the word that has become associated, the classic word, Hebrew word for doubt, safek, is not to be found in the Hebrew Bible. There are versions of that root, as we'll see in a moment, but safek, the abstract concept of doubt, is belongs to a later layer of the development of the Hebrew language. Let's carry on. I want to suggest to you a few areas in which, in our regular discourse, we're going to link this back to the Bible in just one second, but now I'm going to be abstract and maybe a little philosophical for a second. I want to suggest that when we use the term doubt, we use it in all kinds of different ways, relating to all kinds of different claims or assertions. So let's talk about truth claims. They might be historical claims, when somebody comes and tells you how it is that things came to be in their current situation. Or they may be truth claims relating to what's happening at the moment. I can't help but bring you the example of the war that we're currently in. There is a huge gulf, a cavernous, a chasm separating different versions of the history of Israel and Palestine. And there is a huge gulf in assessing, understanding what's actually taking place on the ground. Faced with different claims about truth, be it historical or present, I may respond with doubt. You're telling me X, I'm wondering about Y. There are authority claims. They're often connected to truth claims, but they can be distinguished. That is when I come and tell you, You ought to do what I tell you to do or believe what I'm claiming because I have the requisite authority to make that demand, because God has given me a special status, or because I speak in that I have a license from some authority or other, or whether it be secular, temporal, theological, or whatever. It may be, the tax authorities telling me that they have the right to impound my property. Often faced with a claim or an assertion of somebody else's authority, I may respond with doubt. I may be skeptical about your authority, either because I am answering to another authority, to a higher or contradictory authority, or because I'm skeptical about any person's claim to exert upon another person that kind of authority. Now you have a third category, which I want to call claims of value. It's not truth, this happened or that happened, and it's not authority, I'm licensed to do X or Y. It's value. This is good or bad. This music is higher or lower. This stuff that we're learning together has meaning. Those are claims of value. And here too, often our response to somebody's assertion of value is a dubious response, is to say, I'm not sure that your conclusion about the value of this or that is something that I share. Now, we've talked about the past and the present. Let's talk about the future. In Israel, less this month perhaps than ever before, but in Israel, a typical statement to be made in regular conversation, one person with another, is "Yeh tov," things will be okay. Things are going to work out in a particular way. Faced with a prediction, whether it's an apocalyptic prediction of disaster or a pastoral prediction of everything working out fine, faced with such a claim, I may wonder, I may doubt that the prediction I'm being offered is really coherent, is really gonna work. Now it's time to talk about the religious dimension. Again, I've mentioned to you that this suits a certain kind of Christian theological framework better, but you can certainly find within classical Jewish sources, rabbinic and medieval to be sure, various statements, faith statements, where I am being required to assert an article of faith. And faced with such an assertion, my response may be one of doubt. Now here comes a more psychological one. It's not about facts. It's not even about values. It's about motivations. You tell me that the thing that you did was done for the purest of motives. You did it, you had good intentions, you meant well. And I may not believe you. I may have cause to doubt that whatever the results of the action were, I may have cause to doubt the motivations. We'll close this up, and again, it's difficult to not to put this into the contemporary reality that we're all living through at the moment, which is what happens when somebody comes. It's not a prediction, not quite the same as a prediction, but rather it's a policy. Somebody comes and says, okay, this is the plan. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to climb out of the inflationary spiral, or whatever. You can give any example you like. In our case, in the case of this war, the government, the army, has set aims for what it considers to be the goals of this huge military operation. Faced with that policy, the question that each of us as individuals and we as a society and as a wider community face is, Do we adhere to that, or do we doubt it? Or maybe, as is often the case, us being human beings, maybe we do both. So that was the most abstract I'm going to be, suggesting to you that we doubt, our doubting muscles are actually being used in a variety of different ways. To doubt is to do more than one thing. It is to be confronted with assertions of truth, of authority, of value, of prediction, of faith, of motive, of policy, and in each case to respond to those assertions with a response of a doubt. Now, if we go back to the sources, which I said we would do, this is not the time, and I don't have the time at my disposal to go through with you all of these examples. But even if there is not a word for the abstract concept of doubt to be found within the Hebrew Bible, think about these and many other cases. The serpent in the garden is a voice of doubt. God has instructed Eve and Adam, but the conversation is primarily between the serpent and Eve. It said, there's just one thing you must not do in the garden. And the voice of the serpent, that silent or almost silent hissing voice, is whispering in her ear, really? That's the thing? And by the way, the serpent expresses doubt as to divine motivation. The serpent says to Eve, the reason that God is saying that to you is that God knows that once you do eat from the forbidden fruit, you will be as powerful as God, and therefore you'll be a rival. The voice of the snake is the, if you like, the primal voice, doubting voice to be found in our biblical narrative. Again, in the life of Moses, when he faces the objections of Korach and in other places, when you hear 10 of the 12 spies expressing doubt as to the prediction that we will, Yachol Nuchal, we'll go into the land, we'll conquer it, and everything will be fine. Job, the book of Job, our colleague Jason Kalman has written brilliantly about the book of Job. The book of Job is, as other parts of wisdom literature such as Kohelet, Ecclesiastes as well, is a source of much reflection on doubt. And some scholars, I was reading recently, Ilana Pardes, the Bible scholar, talks about Job's wife, who doesn't have too many lines in the book of Job, but is an expression, becomes a mouthpiece for a message of doubt, wondering whether all of the great epic metaphysical theological claims are really something that should be believed. I'm fast forwarding a little bit, and I want to mention to you a marvelous book by the Israeli scholar Moshe Halbertal, who has taken the literature of the Tannaitic literature, the early layers of rabbinic literature, and most particularly the Mishnah and the Tosefta. We're talking about works from the second, third century of the Common Era and beyond. And he's looked at ways in which the term safek, the concept of doubt, is employed in Jewish legal, and not only legal, but he concentrates on the halachic, on the Jewish legal material. And he makes a remarkable claim in that book. His claim is that what the rabbis, the sages, are doing in the Mishnah is fundamentally different than what he calls a sectarian sensibility. Here's what he writes. One of the social definitions of sectarian existence is the construction of a demarcated and all-encompassing social reality that reduces friction with the environment and consequently conflict with the reality of uncertainty. Such a sweeping prohibition removes, with a wave of the hand, all primary interest in the sorts of uncertainty of which the Mishnah speaks. Let me try and translate that into English. What he's saying here is that there's a sectarian mindset. You can think of the Dead Sea sect of the later period of the Second Temple, or other groups that are strictly self-enclosed, where the point of sectarian existence is to banish all doubt, to live in a community framework in which you know what is right and what is wrong, what is kosher and what is treif, what is permitted, what is forbidden, and wherever doubt comes into the picture, you exterminate it as soon as you can. He says the Judaism being promulgated by the sages of the early centuries of rabbinic culture has a much higher tolerance for doubt. It goes out into the world, out into the wider community, leaving the small enclosed groups where you know all the time what's right and what's wrong. And the rabbis create a vocabulary, a mechanism for handling and dealing with doubt. Again, I don't have the time to give you lots of the examples. The book, which has been translated, The Birth of Doubt, includes lots of these examples. But let me just give you a taste, relating actually to the issue, just as we said taste, the issue of meat. In the Babylonian Talmud, there's a discussion of a town in which has 10 meat dispensaries, 10 butcher's shops, 9 of which are kosher, the 10th of which is would have catered the treif banquet to give you to use the euphemism. What is the status of meat when you cannot remember which of the stores you bought the meat in? Now, from a sectarian mindset, to use Halbertal's terminology, it would be clear that any meat where there's a risk, a fear, a concern that it may be infected, right? It may be somehow not at the level of purity you would wish it to be, that meat cannot be consumed. But actually, the rabbis, in a particular circumstance, if you found the meat not in one of the stores, but you found it in a public thoroughfare, I'm sure it was beautifully wrapped in saran wrap and with the hygienic conditions, you can be sure. The argument that they make is if the town in which this was found is one where there is a preponderance of kosher butchers as opposed to non-kosher, you can be guided by that majority principle. What are they doing here, the rabbis? They're creating a framework within which safek, doubt, can be tolerated, and it moving away from this extremist sectarian worldview. Now, some vestiges of that suspicion of or opposition to the whole area of doubt certainly persist in our tradition. I want to try out a gematria on you. Gematria is, right, the numerological approach where a word has the same numerical value as another word. So in a number of medieval sources, you can find this gematria. Safek, the Hebrew word for doubt, has the same numerical value as Amalek, the biblical arch enemy, right? The biggest fink of all the finks, the enemy of enemies. To say then that Safek is the same as Amalek is to say that you should battle against doubt relentlessly. You should have no truck with doubt. But as Halbertal and others are suggesting, actually Judaism following the biblical period does not adopt such an approach. Rather, it creates mechanisms within which doubt can exist. Okay, you may wonder where Abraham Joshua Heschel is. He's about to appear. Be of good heart. What then can we find within Heschel's work which resonates with this conversation, with these more general ideas I've tried to put out there about the concept of doubt? Let me share a couple of things. This is taken from a series of essays that Abraham Joshua Heschel published in the Gemeindeblatt, in the Berlin Jewish Community newspaper in 1936 and 1937. The Nazis are in power. The Jewish community is gripped with profound anxiety and foreboding as to what's going to happen. Heschel is one of the teachers and spiritual leaders of the community at the time, and he publishes a series of vignettes in which he looks at sages, rabbis of the early centuries of the Common Era, and he tries to learn something from their example. And one of the essays that he writes is about Elisha ben Abuya, known also as Acher, a figure some of you may have come across, Milton Steinberg's great novel As a Driven Leaf, which talks about this figure at some length. What he is doing, Heschel, in this article, remember, this is a newspaper censored by the Nazi Party in Germany in 1936. This is published more or less at the same time as the Olympics are going on in Berlin at the time. He is rehearsing in his articles different kinds of responses. Rabbi Akiva is one kind of a response. Rabbi Meir is another. Rabbi Chia is yet another. And here he talks about Elisha ben Abuya, whose response is one of radical doubt. He writes, the shattering of faith is not new in Judaism. This is Heschel writing. Job, he says, is the classic case of this experience. Acceptance of an individual divinity made human beings expect the reward of piety. He's saying that as Jewish theology develops, and the idea is that there is a God, an individual God, who is part of a system of checks and balances of rewards for actions, the reward that failed to appear gave rise to agonizing doubt about the veracity of faith. What Heschel is saying to his readership in 1930s Germany is, of course, some of us will respond to these dire events by doubting profoundly the claims of our religious tradition. In 1938, Heschel writes a letter to Martin Buber. He had a close relationship with Buber. Buber was a deep influence upon him. Buber it was who gave him a job. When Buber left Germany for Palestine, he asked Abraham Joshua Heschel to take on running the Lehrhaus adult education program in Frankfurt. And Heschel writes a letter to Martin Buber in 1938 as the world is drifting towards, some kind of catastrophe. And he writes to him, amongst other things, this sentence: concepts are suddenly regaining their unambiguousness for everyone. Perhaps we can now bury relativism. There's something about the extreme nature of the circumstances we're living in that perhaps might make it possible for us to get out of this relativistic loop in which everything is considered to have only partial or limited validity or meaning. Here I want to do a little bit of product placement for the Hebrew Union College and for our marvelous library, since that's the framework that we're in. I'm holding one of the rarest of Heschel's books, a book that few people will be acquainted with, even those of you who've read his published work, because this is less published than mimeograph. I don't know whether you can see what I'm holding up here to the screen. It's a concise dictionary of Hebrew philosophical terms that the Abraham Heschel, the teacher, made for his HUC rabbinical students. He wrote it in the fall of 1941, and it's a kind of a guide where he's trying to help his students who may be less acquainted with the literature of medieval Jewish philosophy pick their way through the Hebrew sources. And it is a fascinating book that, as I say, was created essentially in the library and in the classrooms of HUC in Cincinnati. And I want to show you what he has to say about the word safek. I'm looking at the time here, and I'm aware that we're going to try and move this on as quickly as possible. He writes, the book is designed primarily for the use of the students of HUC. Its scope is pedagogical. It offers the meaning of words in philosophical usage and disregards their meaning in other spheres. And then he says, the dictionary is of a tentative character and will be revised from time to time. That's a significant statement. Words do not have, in his understanding and in my understanding of Jewish tradition for sure, a single fixed eternal meaning. If you want to understand what something means, you have to come back to it at different occasions and different situations and see what the word might mean, what resonances it might have. He lists a number of words connected to safek, including need, necessity, doubt and uncertainty, skepticism, to treat something as doubtful, but also the histapek, to be satisfied, to have enough. I want to say a word, again, a linguistic word about doubt and safek. The English word doubt, like most European words for the concept, is based on the word to. Okay, that's the origin of the word doubt in Latin and in German, and you see it all over the place. To. It's a consciousness that alongside one possibility, there's another possibility. The Hebrew word safek has a different root. It doesn't have at its root the number two, but the semantic field of safek seems to include clapping hands. When you clap your hand or slap your thigh, that's lispok. It's when two things come together. In the Mishnah, the word is used for grafting one branch onto another branch. The word safek seems to be, in its origin, connected to bringing two things together, not the abstraction of two, but the question of what happens when I bring one thing alongside another thing. How do I grapple with them? Because I wanted to leave a little bit of time, I'm going to do as much of what follows as we have time for, you know, we can only do what we can do. I'll show you a couple of more things. Whilst on the faculty of the college in Cincinnati, Heschel publishes an article, actually two articles, about Saadia Gaon, the great 10th century figure of Jewish rabbinic leadership and philosophy, arguably the author of the first great Jewish philosophical work of the Middle Ages. And he writes about Saadia's quest for certainty, using that expression which he borrows from the American philosopher John Dewey. And he talks about Saadia as a Jewish thinker more than any other who was preoccupied with the problem of doubt. And he characterizes Saadia's view of doubt as essentially ignorance, as absence of knowledge. The required human state is to have all of your doubts satisfied, and then you can live in a fulfilled way. When you doubt, it's because you haven't been given all the appropriate information. In his later works, such as Man is Not Alone, Heschel writes about doubt. He is dubious about doubt. He acknowledges that doubt is part of human existence, but his critique, this is a critique of post-war America, fashions of thinking in the 1950s in America. He is saying making doubt the foundation of everything is debilitating. He writes, wonder rather than doubt is the root of knowledge. Doubt comes in the wake of knowledge, as a state of vacillation between two contrary or contradictory views. The business of doubt is one of auditing the mind's accounts about reality rather than a concern with reality itself. Don't make doubt the foundation of your worldview, he says, because it will not get you as far as you need to get. Here again, in Man is Not Alone, it's wonder rather than doubt which should have primacy. But he does say in a later book, God in Search of Man, that sometimes wonder and transcendence can be used as a cushion for the lazy intellect. And it should not be, listen to his words here, a substitute for analysis where analysis is possible. It mustn't stifle doubt where doubt is legitimate. I was going to bring you some more of Heschel's Torah of doubt, but I do want to honor the contract that we made at the beginning of this, that there would be space for questions and comments and thoughts. Let's see if there are any questions that have accrued, and I will in the last minute or two. I've got a kind of a runway of how to land us at the end of our hour. Abigail, I don't know if there are any questions you want to share.
No, we don't have any questions yet. So do you want to share one more example?
Oh, perfect. No questions. I've stunned everybody into silence. That's what I call a result. Okay, so good. In that case, we can move on a little bit more. And again, if anybody is motivated to ask something, or they can be in touch with me. Yes, the PowerPoint to your question, I'm happy to distribute to anybody, any gluttons for punishment. No problem at all. All right, so let's go back to this. Heschel, in a book that he wrote in Hebrew in the 1960s, writes in a fascinating way about doubt as a necessary dimension, one dimension of the kind of balance of the human condition. He first of all says, listen to these words which do resonate 60 years later. There is no new day without new problems, no day without new problems proliferating between God and humanity, between individuals, between a person and themselves, between peoples, between states, between religions. And then he goes on to say, he uses a rabbinic expression which first appears in the Mishnah in Tractate Baba Metzia. Two people are holding a talit. This is a classic halachic question. Two people are holding the same garment. One says it's mine, the other says it's mine. But Heschel is using the image in a different way. And he says, who are the two people? Who are these two voices? One is the kapdan, which could be translated as an austere person, a strict person. The other is a nargan, which is it could be translated as something like cynical and argumentative. To go back to previous language that I've employed in this hour, the first voice is a kind of a sectarian voice. It doesn't want any space for doubt. It wants absolute pellucid clarity. Whilst the other voice is a cynical, skeptical voice, a voice of doubt. One says, the first, that doubt is forbidden by Torah. Doubt is like Amalek, like we said before. The other, however, says, I vow not to accept any dogma, any doctrine without exploring it, questioning it, asking about it. And Heschel is suggesting, this is in the introduction to the second volume of the Hebrew Torah Min HaShamayim, he is suggesting that these two voices are tugging at the talit all the time, that you have this kind of tension to be found within our tradition. He writes here, this is an essay towards the end of his life on prayer. Now we get into Heschel, the social reformer, the prophetic voice for change and for justice. There's a pressing urgency to the work of justice and compassion. As long as there's a shred of hatred in the human heart, as long as there's a vacuum without compassion anywhere in the world, there is an emergency. Why do people rage? People rage and hurt and do not now know how to regret, how to repent. the problem is not that people have doubts, but rather that people may not even care to doubt. I think that's a strong statement. There are worse things than doubt. To be apathetic, to be indifferent, to remove oneself is a much more problematic position than to lean in to one's doubts. Heschel.
Robert, can I just jump in right there related to that? One of our very, I think, relevant questions here is someone wants to know if that response to doubt, that uncomfortability with it, does that have anything to do with Heschel's response to the Holocaust and what he saw happen there? Or, you know, how did the Holocaust kind of factor into his perception of, you know, what's a tolerable level of doubt?
Look, Heschel and the Holocaust is a whole other talk, which I would be happy to, when there isn't a war raging, to come back and do. Here's the 30-second version. Most contemporary Jewish thinkers respond to the Shoah, the cataclysm of the Shoah, either with a kind of numbness and silence, or the creation of a kind of theological model, many moving. I'm thinking of a man like Emil Fackenheim, for example, who develop a kind of a theology of survival in which never again becomes a central concept. Heschel also responds with never again, but it's a different never again. It's less about never again will we be in a position of radical powerlessness, although he embraced the state of Israel as a vehicle for not being in that powerless state. Heschel's never again is never again will we humans allow ourselves to be so indifferent to the suffering of those around us that we, by sins of omission, by our own apathy, are somehow complicit in terrible things taking place. So Heschel's post-Holocaust thought is what leads him into his social activism, into his struggling for big questions like issues of civil rights in America, opposition to American involvement in Vietnam, etc. Where doubt, I would say that in some of Heschel's later works, like his last book on the Kotzker Rebbe, you do see a kind of melancholy and a kind of gnawing sense of doubt that has clearly stayed with him or been with him since his formative experiences during the time of the Holocaust. I want to say, as we're close to the end, that people often claim the Heschel, the bits of Heschel they like to suit their own ends. It's a bit like, you know, Maimonides, where you say there's Maimonides and there's your Monides. So in the same case, in the same sort of way, when we're talking about Abraham Joshua Heschel and Israel, for example, you'll find lots of folks who want to tell you that Heschel would certainly have said X or Y. He writes in 1967 a book called Israel, an Echo of Eternity, which is a theological defense of Israel in the immediate aftermath of the Six-Day War. That is certainly true. But it is also true that he is a pacifist, largely speaking, and he is very active in his opposition to the belief that wars can ultimately solve the big issues. So here you have one kind of voice, all right? In this crisis, talking about 67, the issue was clear and lucid, the brutal threat and the deadly danger to the existence of a people and a state. But talking as he does about Vietnam, for example, here in 1966, just a year before, it's a war, he writes, we can never win. Our superior weapons may well destroy the cities and the hamlets, the fighting forces and the villagers who support them. However, what will our army have left behind? Tombs, tears, havoc, acrimony, and vast incentives to hatred and rage. Heschel is Heschel's worldview, his approach, is one in which he's not prepared to give doubt put doubt in pole position, to give it primacy. There are more important and consequential things than doubt in his understanding of life and Judaism. But on the other hand, he doesn't believe that one can ever be, nor should one ever seek to be, fully free. You should actually be a bit nervous of people who have no doubt, who are absolutely convinced about the rightness of their ways and the wrongness of all those who disagree with them. I'm going to leave you with a statement that Heschel wrote in it was at the time unpublished piece that recently came to light and was translated, that he wrote in the late 1930s in the midst of huge upheaval and uncertainty in the world. And he wrote, "Let us not be alone in this realm of danger, in this time of calamity." We're in a realm of danger and we're a time of extreme challenge. And the call for us not to be alone, not to be separated from each other, resonates, at least with me, very loud. And I'm grateful to you for spending this hour along with me. And I just want to thank you for your attention.